Waiver gems and trade block plays. Win today and plan for days. Waiver gems and trade block plays. Win today and plan for days. Waiver gems and trade block plays. Win today and plan for days.
Win your league, stack that bread, or start a boom and lose instead. Sunday Surefire, let's go.
Sunday Surefire Podcasts. It's your host tonight, Aaron Downtown Brown. I'm coming at everyone just 4 days after taking down that fun $1 million lineup on DraftKings and DFS. So I thought it'd be fun if I had the kind of a special episode. I've had some a lot of thanks for everyone kind of reaching out, congratulating and everything. But we all know what also comes with that is, hey, I need to learn more about this DFS thing, right? So what I wanted to do tonight is kind of just give a couple quick tips, put it out in the YouTube world, a couple ways to get started on DraftKings, a couple things that I like to do. If you're kind of veteran members of the show, you've probably heard this a million times, so maybe stick around towards the end of the episode, and where I just kind of give out my tips for week 7. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually just start off by just talking a couple basic tips. I do want to say though, obviously, this is not gonna be financial advice. This is kind of just stuff I've kind of learned along the way. This is like my 5th year in DFS. So yeah, I've had some bumps and bruises for sure, but I know a lot of tension right now is on me over saying, hey, what are some show me some of your tricks, right? So that's what this episode is for. Yeah, like I said, definitely not financial advice, but just kind of want to show how I've had fun over this DFS thing and how you can also make some serious cash as well. All right. So tip number 1. All right. Step 1 is just find your favorite people to listen to. Okay. AKA Sunday Surefire. If you're a football fan, I used to not really be into podcasts before I started one. But there's plenty of them out there. If you like watching football, start listening, just to, get used to the lingo. And also pay attention to what type of, either podcast or stream it is. There is a big difference between like fantasy advice and DFS. We are a fantasy show as well, but it can majorly change from DFS from week to week. So just because we're high on a guy on fantasy doesn't necessarily mean he's going to pop off in DFS for that week, and vice versa, right? So, find some people you like, kind of understand what kind of messages they're sending, and what type of leagues you play, or if you're on here just for DraftKings, then yeah, you want to find somebody just for DFS. All right. So that's tip number 1. As I said, it's always nice to kind of hear, other people's opinions. And then number 2 is kind of just how to bet. And this is an important one. All right. So if you're truly a beginner, I obviously would say to start small. DraftKings has 25-cent games, dollar games. The $3 game is actually really nice. I think you went up like to 100,000 or something like that on the $3 game as well. So yeah, definitely start small. When I first started, I used to play, the maybe like 3 to 4 $3 games, and then maybe I would have like one $1 million lineup, right? And the way I looked at it is, at least if I got my money back or I doubled up, maybe I doubled the entries for next week, or just more more to play with the following week in the NFL. It's a long season; you can't win them all for sure. So you gotta take your wins when you can, but don't go crazy in one week, unless it's like I said, maybe like free money, however you're looking at it. But yeah, just maybe start small if you're just starting out. Like for example, if you got like $100 in your DK account, I'd probably only recommend spending like 25% of it on a weekly basis. This gives you at least 4 weeks of fun if you lost every single week, right? But hopefully you're gonna at least get your money back or more, obviously, for if you're hitting on those plays. as well. But yeah, like 25%. Like I said, yeah, that way you can kind of spread around the type of games you're playing. All right. Um, Now on a DFS specifically, like I said, if you're a member of the show, we always talked about our bullish buys in your lineup. Those are your highest price guys. We call them, the guys that you just gotta get in your lineup. Where, unfortunately, they do cost more to get in your lineup too. So like your Josh Allen's, your CMC's. One point in time it was Justin Jefferson, right? But yeah, I usually say you can safely fit at least two bullish buys in your lineup that are, one of the top prices in their position, and then you got to start budgeting your money a little bit more. Um, After that, I mean, I've had a couple lineups where are a little crazy. I've had like maybe three, sometimes even four bullish buys, but you really got to hit on your cheap guys if you do that. So those don't always work out. But like I said, you can safely fit two in and you start going from there. So of course, with that, what comes after bullish buys are your cheap plays. So it's really just a balance, right? So the more expensive you go, the higher price guys, the cheaper you got to get at some positions, right? I kind of lucked out in my lineup last week because Brock Bowers was hurt and Michael Mayer stepped up in a big way. He was only like $3,000 in my lineup, right? That does not always happen, right? So you can get big old goose eggs on these cheap plays. But the cool thing about it in DraftKings is if these cheap plays really pay out, you might only have like 1% of the entire contest with that same guy. So that puts you at an instant advantage for sure. So thing to look out there with your cheap plays. They're usually somewhere between like 3,000 to 5,000, depending on the position. You know, um, it's not every week's not the same. Like I said, sometimes I go cheaper at QB or cheaper at running back. You really got to look at the matchups. There's not really one strategy that works every single week. Um, and then lastly, your defense. This is funny. I actually missed on this pick with my $1 million lineup. Oddly enough, our host of the show had the top defense of last week. He jokes. He said I should have um, listened to him last week and grabbed the Raiders D. But yeah, either way, I really tend to you know go with two different strategies, picking defenses, and usually the safest one is just try to pick a defense that's going up against like one of the worst offenses in the league. Lowest scoring. Um, usually DK makes them a little bit more expensive. So, you might not always want to, pay up for your defense. But, if they have a big defensive game, get you 10, 15, 20 points, that's huge in DFS, right? So, that definitely pays off. But sometimes if you don't want to pay off, maybe you can pay attention to injuries. Any critical injuries on an opposing offense can, obviously help out the defense, especially like if the main quarterback's out. We've had a couple weeks where like Brock Purdy's out. Mac Jones stepped in fine, but that's not always the case. So yeah, pay attention. What injuries are out there, any big names that are out that might change the way that offense plays. You might want to go with the defense like that. And then sometimes it's just on defense. It's just yeah, you just might luck out with this crazy play or a kick return or something, and that obviously you can't really, plan on those, but hey, it happens, right? So yeah, I mean, those are just just the main, a couple of just main framework of how to set up a DFS lineup. Lastly, you just got to remember, you can have the best lineup out there at times. But remember, there's always injuries. There's always surprises in the NFL. There's these squishy matchups where you want to get certain players in and they kind of bust for you in that week, and that happens, right? So, like I said, just stay playing for fun, bet responsibly. If you're serious, if you're already maybe more, more intermediate player or higher, I like I said, I can have a couple more episodes talking about advanced strategies and a couple things that I think about with picking players, which actually I'm gonna lead into next. Okay, so um now I guess for some of you viewers, I wanted to skip to this point in the video. I'm going to give out some week 7 picks to the 2025 season, starting with my bullish buy in week 7. Okay. So I'm going to go Saquon Barkley this week playing against Minnesota. Yeah, he's I think the top running back of the week, maybe second, over 7,000 play. But big thing is the Eagles are going to be hungry. They just got embarrassed by in conference game with the Giants. So they're going to be hungry. I always like kind of going with the momentum of the NFL a little bit in plays, but two, I guess strategically, Minnesota is also bottom 10 run defense in the league, and talking game script, I really can't see Wentz like blowing out the Eagles, especially after that big loss. Where the Eagles are going to have to constantly play catch up. So I just don't see that in that game script. If it's a close game, Saquon's going to be in the game. If they're ahead, he's going to continue to run and maybe have two 2+ touchdowns. So Saquon's my big bullish buy of the week in week 7. And on the defense, I'm gonna go with the pod, part, I guess 2/3 of the pod's favorite team. I'm gonna go with the New England Patriots. I'm gonna go back to that strategy. It's worked all year. I went away from it, and fortunately did not bite me in the butt too bad last week. But New England is playing the Tennessee Titans, the worst offense in the league. So, like I said earlier, strategy, just go against one of the worst offenses. Like I said, it's consistently worked all year. And, I guess to put a little icing on the cake is that, Calvin Ridley, Cam Ward's, best wide receiver might be out this week too. So they're just losing weapons in Tennessee. It's not looking good. So they are one of the higher priced defenses of the week. They're 3,400. But I like it in my lineup this week. All right. And then moving on to my cheap play is Kamani Vidal. Okay, so he's 5,500 this week, just coming off of a big week. Is playing the Indianapolis Colts, who are the seventh worst graded run defense in the league, averaging they average about a 4.4 average depth of tackle in the league. All right. So kind of, to me that kind of makes sense. Their line means that they kind of struggle a little bit on the defensive line, but they do have a strong set of linebackers where they're actually one of the best tackling teams in the league. So yeah, it goes past those big front four, but then at least the linebackers are coming through. But yeah, even so, like I said, they're still giving up 4.4 yards carry. And Kamani Vidal is relatively cheap. Like I said, the 5,500 price. He toted the rock last week, right? He had 18 carries last week, 124 yards, and caught 3 passes. So I like Vidal. All right, guys. So there you have it. There's my 3 plays of week 7. Stay in the pod, stay following us. I know there's a lot of fantasy fans, but I know DFS is kind of interest has turned up within the last couple days for sure. So stay reaching out. Reach out on all of our social medias. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. But yeah, we're always available for to chat, DM, whatever it is. We'll be there for Sunday Surefire. So I guess until next time, peace.